Shameez was born and raised in Cape Town, South Africa. She is a civil engineer by day, fantasy author by night, and a chocolate chip cookie fiend somewhere in between. Her literary adventures take her to new worlds filled with magic, monsters, and someone to fall in love with. Shameez, over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Shameez Patel, Papathanasiou. Hope you can all hear me. I'll be reading from The Last Feather, which is my debut fantasy novel, and I'll be reading from Lucas's point of view. This is chapter 3, after he's tried and failed to contact his best friend Cassia via her dreams, since they're in different realms. Lucas slammed his fist on the dark wooden table, sending a shudder through the large dining room. Cass still couldn't hear him. She seemed to have stopped trying. When she occasionally tried speaking, he couldn't hear her either. He sighed, watching her stare at him, mildly amused. If he wasn't so desperate to get hold of her, he'd have found it amusing too. Blinking a few times, she disappeared. Presumably, she'd woken up. He often found himself wondering whether it was for work or university. He hoped she'd gone on to study medicine, just as she said she would, even though he'd used every opportunity to try and convince her to take a gap year with him and backpack through Europe. That's it, Lachlan said, exhaling. I'm going to fetch her myself. Lachlan hovered behind him like a shadow, overwhelming him, not necessarily with darkness, but a lack of light. Lucas pushed his chair back and stood. He turned to face Lachlan, meeting his hard gaze. Lachlan's unnatural blue eyes flashed. Your plan isn't working. I'll fetch her. His tone was hard and unkind. Discomfort grew in Lucas's stomach. If he had it his way, he wouldn't let Lachlan near her. Even though Lachlan said he needed Cassia as much as they did, he was still a first. Back off, Lucas replied. We're doing this my way. He took a step toward Lachlan, and while Lachlan, being a first, was already taller than the average person, Lucas towered over him. Lachlan raised his hands in surrender, and a playful smirk covered his smug face. All right, Your Highness. Don't call me that, Lucas countered. A muscle in his jaw hardened, and he willed it to relax. He wouldn't let Lachlan's taunting get to him, not today. Lachlan rolled his eyes and said, I thought it would be wise to teach you some manners, since you always conveniently forget to address me properly. He grabbed the end of his maroon and gold cloak, lifting the first insignia, a full moon surrounded by 6 stars, to his chest, and vanished. Lucas marched upstairs to the library, seething. This was usual after any interaction with Lachlan. The library door swung open at his command, and the lights turned on. Shelves extended as far as he could see. He had been here for about 4 years, and there were parts of the library he still hadn't had the chance to explore. Books and scrolls lined the walls from floor to ceiling. The dark shelves absorbed light and ushered in a quietness that was unshakable. He slid his hand across the book covers, dust flickered off and disappeared into darkness. He found the Book of Visionaries exactly where he had last seen it and made his way over to the desk in the corner. He sat down and opened the heavy book from the beginning for the 3rd time. There had to be a way he could speak to her in her dreams. He must be missing something. Maybe he wasn't powerful enough. Maybe she wasn't. Or maybe their bond wasn't as strong as he thought. Whatever the problem was, he had to solve it. Too many lives depended on it. Lucas. He spun around, recognizing the deep voice. Zoe stood behind him, casually leaning against one of the shelves, a shelf filled with smut. These are my favorites, Zoe said, sticking his thumb out, pointing at the shelf behind him. A laugh escaped Lucas, against his better judgment. You must be the one who's putting them there. All literature should be respected, Zoe replied with a wide, toothy smile, his white teeth contrasting with his dark skin. His broad body pushed off the shelf as he made his way toward Lucas. No luck? Nothing. Same as always. I don't think she can hear me. Lucas slammed the book closed and stood up. According to this book, he said, throwing it toward the shelf where it levitated and settled in between 2 other books perfectly. It's unlikely that I'd be able to reach her since I'm not a visionary. It was a long shot anyway. We need a new plan. How about a bit of lunch before we get started, yeah? Zoe replied, his brows furrowed as he walked over and casually slapped Lucas on the back. Lucas sighed and nodded. Zoe always knew when to step in. If it weren't for him, Lucas wouldn't have survived on this side. He arrived here in the Selene realm in the midst of a hurricane. Little did he know he was the cause of it. If Zoe hadn't managed to calm him down, he would have destroyed himself and everything around him. Zoe took full advantage of this fact. They made their way around the long passage in silence. The house, or more accurately, the manor, was different from the home he grew up in. It was old and worn, but he didn't mind. There was a sense of familiarity. Every crack in the wall or scuffed linoleum flooring had a story to tell, and every story was far more interesting than the life he used to live. Zoe sniffed and cheered. "Bree's baked something," he said, increasing the speed of his walk until he broke into a full-fledged run. Lucas shook his head in amusement as his stomach growled at the scent of freshly baked bread. Since he arrived here, he was almost always hungry. They entered the kitchen as Bree was removing the steaming loaves of bread. Her hands were covered in red oven mitts she'd knitted herself, and a soft smile covered her pretty face as she set the bread down on the table. Lucas and Zoe waited eagerly, their mouths watering as they watched her slice through the bread. "Watching me isn't going to make it go any quicker, boys." Lucas jumped up to slice some cheese, and Zoe quickly intercepted the knife and said, "Let me do it." "I know how to slice cheese," Lucas replied, slouching back into his seat. "Yeah, but I'm better at it," Zoe said, tossing the knife into the air and catching it without breaking eye contact with Lucas. "Nice," Lucas said. "Excellent use of your skills." Bree sat down next to Lucas and asked, "Hey, still no luck?" "If everyone could stop asking me that, it would be great," he snapped, and immediately regretted it. He looked up into Bree's big blue eyes, naturally blue, he noted, unlike the bright blue eyes of the firsts. "I'm sorry, I just don't know what to do." She covered his hand with her own and gave him a sympathetic smile. "You're not doing this alone. We're all here for you, remember?" "Yeah, you don't actually need any of them. You've got me," Zoe said, that smile fixed on his face as he prepared their sandwiches. "Bree, we're going to need another bread." "I baked 5 of them, but you can get it yourself," she snapped, narrowing her eyes at Zoe. He blew her a kiss in response, and she rolled her eyes. Lucas stifled a laugh. This was usual for every mealtime. "Maybe we could do this without her," Bree asked, turning her attention back to Lucas. Her blonde hair fell into her face, and Zoe reached out to push it back, nearly losing a hand in the process. Bree was as good with a knife as he was. "We don't even know if she can help us. It's all a big risk." "She needs to be here. She'll be able to help. Plus Lucas hesitated, swallowing down his sandwich before continuing. "I want to help her sister." Bree sat back, understanding clouding over her eyes. She crossed her arms, and before she could say anything, Zoe spoke. "Is she hot?" he asked, wiping a few crumbs off his chin. "She's 11. "Never mind then. What about Cassia? Is she hot?" "We're not allowed to interfere with what happens on this side, Lucas," Bree said. She bit the inside of her cheek. Her sandwich was still untouched. "If the king finds out, I know, but I have to. Her sister shouldn't be in that much pain, especially when we know what it is. We know how to fix it. Why should she suffer? Why should Cass suffer with her?" Lucas noticed the fear entering Bree's eyes. He felt Zoe's heavy hands drop down on his shoulders. He hadn't seen Zoe move to stand behind him. "Sorry," Lucas mumbled. He knew he'd done it again. He'd tapped into the power that equally impressed and frightened them. Thank you.